with everybody. We are joined by Jeremy Beckham, a longtime anti-cruelty advocate. Are you still executive director of UARC too?
UARC at this moment doesn't really have an executive director, but I'm still
Okay.
heavily involved with UARC. So
Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. So I don't know anybody who knows more about FOIAs and public records requests than Jeremy. He has so much to teach us all, and a great advocate for the animals, working for a variety of different organizations in the past. So it's awesome to have us here and have you here. And please, anybody, if you have any questions, save them till the end. You can always post them in the chat and then we'll go through them afterwards. But I just wanted to share a couple of FOIAs that changed my life. I didn't really know anything about this process until like October of 2020, when Eva of Direct Action Everywhere sent me this screenshot that is an email from Hannah Thompson Weeman of the Animal Agriculture Alliance. And it says that they had sent out an alert to our California members and wanted to inform everybody that we've received reports that Crystal, he's a veterinarian who is also an activist with Direct Action Everywhere, is posting in veterinary Facebook groups about shadowing poultry, swine, and dairy veterinarians in California. Given her involvement with extreme activism, we believe her intentions are to gather information she can use against the industry. I've attached a few screenshots, and the screenshots just include me asking to shadow livestock vet. And the other one is a post that I shared on my public Facebook page at the same time from Direct Action Everywhere, saying that it was racist to blame the Chinese wet markets for COVID-19 when our factories farms pose the same pandemic risk. And that was the nail in the coffin for them, that I was pretty much not to be trusted. And they said, we recommend spreading the word to your veterinary contacts in California using private members only channels. And this document was found via FOIA request of the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service. And that whole stack, we got like 100 pages, including this email too from Dallas Hockman, who's the vice president of the National Pork Producers Council, talking about ventilation shutdown and saying McDonald's is asking questions and telling people that they needed to come up with a new name for ventilation shutdown, which is basically roasting animals alive as a way of killing them. And this was done during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the slaughterhouse capacity was reduced by 50% and swine producers had nowhere to take their pigs. And this was the best solution that they had come up with to solve that problem, which was absolutely horrifying. And footage from Direct Action Everywhere showed the horror of pigs being killed by ventilation shutdown. It became a huge media thing, and we got to see behind the scenes what happened and how the pork industry and veterinary groups were scrambling to address this in the media. And then this is all detailed in this story by Glenn Greenwald. This is the last story that he published for The Intercept before leaving. So I will stop sharing my screen. I think that's all I have, and pass it over to Jeremy Beckham.
All right. Thanks so much, Crystal. Can everyone see and hear me okay? First question.
Yes, sounds great.
Okay, excellent. So I apologize for having kind of a bit of an ugly background here. I'm in the process of kind of moving some things around. The good news is that for most of this meeting, I'll be a tiny little box on the right anyway, because I'm going to share my own screen and hopefully not mess this up. Just 1 second here. Okay. All right, can everybody see my little presentation here?
Looks good.
Okay, excellent. So a real quick introduction to myself. And I also want to let everybody know I've had a minor but persistent case of bronchitis for a little while. So I may occasionally be clearing my throat or coughing. I'll try to mute myself as best as I can so as not to be too distracting, but please just have a little bit of patience with me about that. But my name's Jeremy Beckham. I've been involved in the animal rights movement now for a little over 20 years. During that time, I've been a part of a lot of local and grassroots organizations, including Utah Animal Rights Coalition, I was involved in the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty campaign a long time ago, Primate Freedom Project, and I've also worked for some of the larger groups like PETA and Beagle Freedom Project. And during that time, I've literally submitted probably a few hundred FOIA and state open records requests. And gone through these requests, I've learned a lot about the process. I've learned a lot about the appeals, how to effectively use these laws for our objectives. And I just thought I'd kind of share some of what I've learned. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the laws just briefly. No, first of all, I'm not an attorney, so none of this is legal advice in the technical sense of the term, but it is based on my experience both as a plaintiff in many open records cases and also in working in close conjunction with attorneys at several of these organizations I've worked for in the past with regards to open records requests. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a few, three to be precise, three case studies where I think I've been involved in using FOIA and open records to achieve a meaningful victory for the animals. But let's talk a little bit about the laws themselves. So first, what is the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA? You'll hear that term FOIA a lot during this talk. It was a federal law that was passed during the 1960s to make the federal government more transparent and easily understood. And the rationale behind this law is that in order for democracy to function, we have to have a well-informed citizenry that is able to understand the functioning of their government. The other thing about FOIA is that it creates some public transparency, which is another layer of accountability. So if you have elected officials or government officials that are saying things or organizing things or doing things that they shouldn't be doing, things that are contrary to the public interest, and there's any kind of paper trail regarding that misconduct, then theoretically a journalist or a member of the public would be able to obtain those records, brandish them about to the public, and if they're an elected official, that might cost them an election. And without having an ability to obtain those documents, all of their jobs would be pretty much held in total secrecy, and they'd be able to lie about what they're doing, and it'd be a lot harder to hold people accountable based on what they're doing. So that's kind of the gist of why FOIA originally passed. Similar to FOIA, we have state open records laws. Sometimes these are called sunshine laws, okay? All 50 states have one of these laws, and these are basically an equivalent of FOIA, but for state agencies, okay? In Utah, which is where I live, for example, we have a law called GRAMA, which stands for Government Records Access and Management Act. And wherever you live, if you live in the United States, if you live in California, for example, you have something called the California Public Records Act. If you live in New York, you have what's called FOIL, the Freedom of Information Law. And there's just different names in different states. And the relative strengths and weaknesses of these laws do vary, but there are some broad similarities to FOIA. Just they apply to state agencies instead of to federal agencies, okay? But you will see unique provisions related to exemptions, fees, and appeals processes from state to state. One thing to remember, excuse me, is that municipal, that's city government, and county governments are considered political subdivisions of the state. What this means is that state open records laws apply to local government as well, okay? So if you're trying to get a document from the Berkeley City Council, you use the California Public Records Act. If you're trying to get a record from the University of California, Davis, you also use the California Public Records Act. If you're trying to get a record from the US Food and Drug Administration, you use FOIA because that's a federal agency. The National Institutes of Health, federal agency. US Department of Agriculture, federal agency. Okay, so anything that's not a federal agency, if it's a state agency or it's a city or county government, you use your state open records law. Hope that makes sense. This is just a little bit of a footnote. I'm not going to talk about this too much in this presentation, but all 50 states also have an open meetings law. And these laws allow you to attend and sometimes, not always, provide some public comment or input at governmental meetings. And these meetings have to be held and open unless they can cite a reason in the statute to close their meeting. And one little last footnote here. The word FOIA has now often taken a generic meaning and also a verb. So people will say, I'm going to FOIA them, or I'm going to FOIA those records. People turn it into a verb, and people often also use the term FOIA even when they're actually referring to a state records law. So it's not technically correct. It's kind of like using Kleenex, even if it's just an off-brand of tissue paper or whatever, same kind of thing. So, and including this presentation, you may hear me say I FOIA'd these records from a Utah agency when technically I didn't. I used grandma, but it's kind of taken on a generic meaning too. Hope that makes sense. Here's some basics about FOIA, and this is generally true of the state open records laws as well. The first question is, what is a record? Because a record is what you can obtain through FOIA. Well, a record is any form or medium that contains a permanent record of something or a permanent memorialization of something. This can be actually quite a wide range of things. This can be emails, this can be text messages, this can be photographs, this can be videos. They have to be, though, in the custody of the government agency that you're requesting them. They don't necessarily have to have originated from that agency. So if you have, for example, the CEO of Smithfield sending an email to the USDA, that is still a record held by the USDA because they retained that communication from an outside party, and you should be able to request that, okay? But it includes, and this is a very important thing, I think, for our purposes, photographs and videos as well. Those are forms of records. It can be an audio recording as well. Any of these things are considered records under the law. Under FOIA, any person, including you, can request records held by the federal government, and state laws allow for the same records held by state agencies. That's those state open records laws I told you about. All executive branch agencies must comply with FOIA. However, this is an important note. FOIA does not apply to Congress or the courts, okay? It's just executive branch agencies. And there's a lot of them. I'm not going to go into in depth all of them. It's things like the Department of Justice, Department of Commerce, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and everything that falls underneath it as well. So you have something, for example, like the Department of Health and Human Services. Underneath that is the FDA. Underneath that same agency is the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. So you have subdivisions of executive branch agencies, but it has to be an executive branch agency. You cannot FOIA Senator Mike Lee or Senator Rand Paul because they're in the legislative branch. Once you submit your FOIA, the government is required to respond to your request. They can respond generally in 3 different ways. They can either deny your request, they can provide you with the records you requested, or they can ask for fees first to process your request. Now, the fees are supposed to reflect their actual cost in complying with your records request. So if you requested every single grant the NIH ever handed out between 1970 and 2020, 50 years of records, that's going to be millions of pages, and they can probably try to assess you millions and millions of dollars of fees. But if you kept your request a bit more narrow, then they shouldn't be able to charge you exorbitant fees. Fees can sometimes be a sticking point with these requests, and I myself have had a couple issues of litigation over fees, but just know that that's something you may have to confront and deal with at some point. Here's the last point I wanted to say about the basics of FOIA that it's important to know. Government records are presumed to be public unless an exemption applies. So the presumption is on openness. You don't need to point to a specific law that says they have to release the thing you requested. The burden is on the state or is on the government to point to an exemption that allows them to withhold it, okay? And similarly, if you have a record that contains both public and private things, the government still has to provide you with that record, but they're allowed to black out or redact the private portions of that record. So if you have an email communication about, for example, I know Crystal does a lot of work on ventilation shutdown. And let's say you have the USDA emailing their veterinarians, coordinating a mass depopulation on a farm somewhere. And at the bottom of the email, they say, by the way, how's your wife doing these days? It'd be great to see you at the Little League soccer game again. They can't refuse to give you that whole email because some of it contains personally private information, which is one of the exemptions under FOIA. They have to provide you with that email, but black out the part that was a personally private discussion that didn't relate to their job as a government employee. So those are some of the basics with FOIA. Here's a few more. FOIA is frequently used by journalists, activists of all stripes, including animal advocates, as well as attorneys engaged in various forms of litigation. This is another really important point I want to stress. Government agencies are not required to create a new record in response to your request, okay? The record has to already exist in their files, on their hard drive, somewhere they have to be already holding on to this record, and you as the requester have the burden to properly identify the record that you're requesting. So if you send them a request and say, I would like, I'm trying to think of an example, but you know, a record, I would like a record showing every single monkey in your lab that has a toy in their cage. If they don't already keep that record, they're not going to be under any legal obligation to generate that record and then produce it for you. They're just going to say no records exist, and that will be a proper response under the law. Okay. Prior to sending your FOIA request, what you're going to want to do is do some preliminary research about what records it is you want to request. Okay. You want to be able to be as specific as you can, include a time frame. That's a really important thing. Say records from January 1st, 2021 to present. That would be almost 2 full calendar years since we're nearing the end of 2022. So you want to have that time frame, and then you want to say what you're searching for. And I'll talk about in my case example some of the specific things that I've searched for and that we've used in some of our animal advocacy campaigns. Okay. Once you figure out what you want to request, you have to figure out who the records custodian or FOIA officer is at your agency. With federal agencies, this is actually almost always very easy to do. If you just go in and type in APHIS, that's a division under USDA, and APHIS FOIA, you'll get a website right away that's APHIS FOIA office. And the same is true for pretty much every federal agency. Sometimes municipal, local government, state government, it's not quite as cut and dry. You may have to dig a little bit on the internet, or you may have to pick up the phone and call them. And you can do that. You can just call the agency and say, hey, I have a records request that I'd like to submit to you. Who should I send that email to? And they should be able to tell you who that is. If you absolutely can't find it, let me tell you another place that I often send these requests to is if the agency has a staff attorney or a counsel, okay, a general counsel's office. Those people should be trained on how to respond to these requests and who to direct them to, okay? So those are some of the big basics, I guess you could say. Let me see really fast. I'm just looking at the chat to see if I have, some good questions here from Rick about info on wild horses that are held in multiple district BLM office. And BLM office replies that this info is unobtainable. So Rick, is that a proper response? The question is going to depend on some of the details. I will say don't take their word for it. Many times I've had to appeal and sue these agencies, and I have a little bit of familiarity with the BLM, and I definitely don't find them to be a very trustworthy agency. So this is not a very good answer for this meeting, but honestly, what I would recommend is shoot me an email, okay? Shoot me an email that shows your request, shows their response, and let me do a little bit of digging for that, because I can't know until I see what you requested, and maybe doing a little bit of research on what kinds of records they should have. I might be able to help you craft slightly different language that makes it harder for them to wiggle out of your request that way. So much of this comes down to your exact choice of words when you submit your request. And that's something, honestly, you just sort of get with experience doing these requests. I think everybody, when they're kind of new to this stuff, might submit requests with wording that the government agency can kind of be like, aha, he didn't word this exactly right. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Let me go ahead and go on to the next thing. So here's kind of segueing into this a little bit, actually. Let's talk a little bit about denials and delays. So if the government wants to withhold records from you, they have to, and this is what I was telling you about, the records are presumed to be public. If they want to withhold them, they have to cite an exemption, a specific law, a statute, or a regulation that allows them to not give you that record you wanted. FOIA only has 9 exemptions. Now that sounds like not a lot, but I can tell you that some of these exemptions are rather large and end up swallowing up a lot of records. Some of the exemptions that you might see cited are records that would threaten national security or expose state secrets. A really common one that animal advocates deal with, especially if you're working on some animal testing campaigns, which I think Diana is, you'll get exemption 4 a lot, which is commercial information that is privileged or proprietary data or trade secrets. Those all kind of fall into that same exemption. Records which would invade someone's personal privacy, and records, and this is another one I see quite a bit, records related to an ongoing law enforcement investigation. Once the investigation's closed, though, those same records can be FOIA'd. There has to be an active ongoing law enforcement investigation for them to deny you on that basis. If you believe you've been improperly denied records, and believe me, it will happen. It's happened to me many times. You can appeal in court under FOIA. You can either file a lawsuit in the district where you reside. So for me, I'd be filing a lawsuit in the District Court of Utah, or FOIA actually also allows you to appeal in Washington, D.C., because that's where all these agencies are headquartered. So you actually have the option of doing both. If you do that, I do suggest at that point trying to find an attorney who can help you. And if you're in need of a FOIA attorney, reach out to me. I know some spread out all around the country. I may not necessarily know an attorney off the bat in your state. If you reach out to me and you're like, Jeremy, I live in Omaha, Nebraska, I don't know an attorney there, but I do know attorneys in other parts of the country, and they may know attorneys, or they may go onto Twitter. There's a very active legal community on Twitter, and they may put their feelers out. If you're in California, I just want to throw a quick shout out to Matthew Strugar, fantastic attorney that's helped me with FOIA requests many times, and some of you may know him. One other thing, unfortunately, lengthy delays are becoming increasingly common with FOIA. I think almost anyone who's still sending out a lot of FOIA requests is dealing with this more and more and more. Agencies are getting more and more understaffed, and they're also just frankly using delays as a tactic to not give records. Unfortunately, there's little that you can do in this situation other than, again, go to court. You can go to court and get a court order that compels them to respond to your records request. But that's just another difficulty that can happen with FOIA that I want to talk about briefly, at least. So let's talk about what are some things you can request from FOIA. Well, really, you can request just about anything, but here's some things that you may find interesting. You can request records that are held about you. These records may be held by the FBI. This is commonly called your FBI file. I've requested my own FBI file. I found it very interesting. I recommend everyone do it. It took about 18 months for me to get my records though. So start today because it's a very long process and you have to be patient. In addition to your FBI file, I actually requested my records from the Salt Lake City Police Department. I've been an actor for a long time. They also had a file on me. So your local law enforcement agency may have a file on you as well. And it's just pretty interesting to look at. To see what social media groups you're in that they're also in, who they've talked to that you didn't know was talking to them. Their name may be redacted, but often you can sort of piece it together anyway. So there's just some interesting stuff in there. And also it kind of can show you sometimes what fools they all are. There were some just comical things in there about them making connections that are ridiculous, that shouldn't have been made, and no reasonable person would have made them, but they don't know what they're doing. And so it's just interesting to look at. Another thing, I've worked a lot on animal testing issues, and I think there's a few people on this call who are interested in that as well. You can request with FOIA and state open records laws, records held by a public university. These are state agencies, okay? So you can request records related to their research on animals. This includes things like individual animals' vet records, their care logs, the research protocol that's approved by what's called an IACUC, their oversight committee, or even photographs and video, if any exist. Now, a lot of these labs are getting smarter and smarter, and they're not taking photographs and video of their animals. And remember what I told you earlier? You can't force them to create a record. You can only request what already exists. So if they never take a photograph or video of their animal, it never exists, and you can't request it. But sometimes they're not thinking about FOIA, and they take photographs and videos of their animals. I'm actually going to talk about one of my 3 case studies is like that. You can also request records related to any unethical government practice that you want to draw attention to, or you would like to attract media scrutiny of, even if it's lawful. Or you can request records related to the enforcement of any law or violations of law that occur, including those laws that govern the treatment of animals. Excuse me. So how can FOIA, once you get these records, what can you do with them to help create change? Well, in my experience, animal advocates often have a credibility perception problem with the media and the public. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of people think we're nuts. This is an unfortunate thing because I think actually we're on the right side of history and we have a lot of very legitimate criticisms, but there's still this perception out there that we're all wacky PETA people, we're overly emotional, those kinds of things. And people have a baseline skepticism. I have found this over and over and over that I have to produce 10 times the amount of documentation to substantiate something I'm saying compared to an animal agriculture's press person or their PR firm. For whatever reason, the media will swallow whole, especially if it is someone affiliated with a public university, affiliated with animal research, they'll swallow whole what they're saying, that they treat the animals humanely. I've even had situations, this drives me absolutely nuts, where one of their spokesperson will say, we comply with animal welfare laws. And I say, no, they don't. Here's the violation from the USDA. Just believe your own lying eyes. I have the violation, the date of the violation, where they broke the law, and the media, I've had reporters be like, I can't tell who's telling me the truth. And so it can be very difficult. So one thing that these records can do is help, at least help try to close that credibility gap. Because if you have the original documentation, if you have them in their own words saying these things, it makes it easier for us to be believed, okay? The other thing that records can do is I think it behooves all of us to try to be, as best we can, subject matter experts in these fields, whatever your passion is. If it's fur, great. If it's animal testing, great. If it's rodeo, great. But try to learn as much as you can about the rodeo industry. Try to learn as much as you can about animal testing. What kind of animals are used in labs? Why are they using them? What kind of laws exist? You know, all of those kinds of things we should try to understand and become familiar with as much as you can, because it allows you to become a better advocate. It allows you to identify weaknesses in these industries that you can maybe exploit. And so open records requests can just be for your own education to help you understand something better, okay? Third thing, records requests can be a vehicle themselves for generating interest in the story, okay? So I've had issues, for example, with the University of Utah's Animal Lab. Many, many cases. If you Google my name in University of Utah, you'll find articles going back about 20 years of me fighting for records there. And often the media says, when the university denies my request, it says, no, you can't have these records, or we want $5,000 for these records. It prompts people to say, I wonder what it is exactly they're trying to hide here. Why are they trying to cover this up? It makes people think where there's smoke, there's fire. If they don't want to give these records over, there must be something there that this guy's digging around in that's worth talking about, okay? And lastly, when you really hit the gold mine, this happens sometimes, for real. You may, in your records request, actually uncover evidence of malfeasance, waste, fraud, abuse, or violations of the law that will lead to further steps that you can take. You can take these records and file administrative complaints. You can take these records and file lawsuits based off of them. You can introduce them as evidence in court. You can use them just for your general messaging when you're doing protests and demonstrations, okay? We took, for example, we got records from USDA about how this horrible zoo called Lagoon violated the Animal Welfare Act. We took that inspection report and blew it up into a giant protest sign. Just the document to show people, look what they did, okay? So it can be a good protest visual. Or you can take these records and meet with your senator, your representative, your city council member, etc., and lobby for reforms, okay? I'm going to talk about 3 examples of cases that I've been involved with where I've utilized open records requests to achieve a meaningful victory of animals. There may be a couple graphic photographs and videos during this part. I just want to warn people. I'll try to warn people best I can, but just be aware of that. So the first example was when I worked at PETA. One of the campaigns that I was most closely involved with was a campaign against the University of Wisconsin-Madison for doing these awful experiments on cats, okay? Here's some of the background. We learned through published papers that experimenters at UW-Madison were doing sound localization experiments on cats. As part of these experiments, what they were doing was making the cats deaf. They were actually dripping an acid inside their ears to destroy the nerve endings that allowed them to hear. So they were making these cats deaf. Then they were implanting electronic devices into their brains. And then they were attaching little wires actually underneath their scalps to measure their ear movements. Those are called pinnae in cats. And so what they were trying to do is to see if they could stimulate the auditory nerve in a deafened cat that would still allow them to tell where a sound was coming from. If they moved their ear, that meant, oh, they were able to tell that sound came from the right or it came from the left. That's called sound localization. Not just hearing a sound, but understanding where it comes from, okay? But as part of these experiments, they were killing a lot of cats because at the end of the experiment, they would kill the cat, cut their heads off and look at their brains. And these cats had all this instrumentation implanted in their brains. They were actually deprived of food and water for up to 6 days to keep them very hungry and thirsty during what are called neurological recording sessions. And they were just really, really gruesome, cruel experiments. So UW-Madison State University, that means the Wisconsin Open Records Law applies. We submitted an open records request under this law for many categories of records related to this experiment. We asked for the animal use protocol. That's what they submit to their oversight committee to describe the experiment. We asked for veterinary records of the cats. We asked for surgical records during any of the procedures. And most especially, we asked for photographs. And I'll tell you, when we requested those requests for photographs, we didn't necessarily know that photographs existed. But there's no harm in tacking that on. What if they do? And if they can't lie, that's actually a criminal violation of the law if they try to do that. So they usually won't try to lie. So lo and behold, it turned out they had photographs of these experiments. But they didn't want to give them to us. They tried to claim they were proprietary and trade secrets, which frankly was bullshit. And we knew it was bullshit. So we sued them. We sued them, and it lasted years. I was deposed. Other people at PETA were deposed. They were deposed. It lasted years and years and years. That could be a whole PowerPoint presentation itself. I won't go through all of the legal ins and outs, but I want to just let you know at the end of that, it ended in a settlement. Okay. Part of the terms of the settlement were that they were going to give us a bunch of records, but that was it. We couldn't ask for anything else from University of Wisconsin about the experiments, but we were going to get the photographs. And that's really what we knew we wanted, because photographs are very powerful in terms of public persuasion. So we got all these records. Not only did we get the photographs, we got the surgical logs and the care logs. All of this actually painted a really horrific picture of what was going on in this lab. And PETA actually made a video based on this that I'm going to show you now. And this video, I want to just stress, it has close to 1 million views now, I think. And pretty much the entire basis of this video was records we got through the public records law. There was never a PETA undercover investigator in this lab, ever. All of the photos you see were photos taken by the experimenters themselves that we submitted, that we obtained through submitting a records request, okay? So this whole basis for this video, if I can figure out how to play it, here we go. Can people hear that? Did you hear that piano? Okay. See, that's a little image from the video, from the records we got.
After a 3-year legal battle against the University of Wisconsin-Madison, PETA has obtained records and dozens of never-before-seen photographs of a cat named Double Trouble, who was used in cruel experiments.
That was their name, by the way.
All of the photographs you're about to see were taken of Double Trouble by the experimenters themselves. As part of a taxpayer-funded project, Double Trouble had steel coils implanted into her eyes, and a steel post was screwed into her skull. Experimenters used this metal post, as well as a blue nylon bag, to keep Double Trouble immobilized while she was forced to listen to sounds coming from different directions. She was also deprived of food for several days before these sessions to coerce her to cooperate in exchange for a morsel of food fed to her through the metal device in front of her mouth. Later, experimenters intentionally deafened Double Trouble by applying a toxic chemical to her inner ear. Then holes were drilled into her skull so that experimenters could implant these electrical devices on both sides of her head. Wires connected to electrodes in her brain protruded from the grotesque contraption on Double Trouble's head. Double Trouble's records show that her experimenters allowed the mask delivering anesthesia to Double Trouble to fall off, and she started to wake up as experimenters were cutting into her head and skull. After these procedures, Double Trouble's face was left partially paralyzed and her health rapidly deteriorated. More than 3 months after her last surgery, her records described the head wound as still open, moist, and bloody. It soon became infected, and UW staff noted that she appeared depressed. UW experimenters admitted there was a, quote, problem with the experiment. Ultimately, it was deemed a complete failure. Because experimenters no longer had a use for her, Double Trouble was killed, her head was cut off, and experimenters examined her brain. Experimenters excused abusing 30 cats every year in this cruel experiment by stating that it would help them, quote, keep up a productive publication record that ensures constant funding, end quote. To date, no papers have been published in any medical journals as a result of the suffering Double Trouble endured. Help us make sure that not even one more cat meets this cruel fate at the University of Wisconsin. Please visit PETA.org/Double Trouble and tell the funders for this project to stop funding this cruel experiment.
So it should be pretty clear why the university had to be sued, right? Why they wouldn't just readily hand over those photos and hand over these records. And by the way, that quote about the productive publication record ensuring constant funding, that also came from the protocol that the Animal Use Committee approved. So all of that, every single little detail you heard there, not just the photos, came from our public records request in our lawsuit. And it led to this huge campaign. You can see we took the photographs and put them on the sides of buses. There were 30 buses in the Madison area that had this ad on the side of them while it was going on. PETA also rented like a mobile, whatever you call that thing, a mobile billboard, and circled the state capitol during the legislative session in Wisconsin. And then myself and James Cromwell took these pictures, and I have to.
This company didn't have deep observability from Gigamon. As a result,
I'm trying to
their
show
cloud
my screen
environment was
because this
vulnerable to
video
threats their
wouldn't let me
observability
embed.
tools couldn't see. And they got.
Can people see this?
Makes local
Okay.
headlines today, storming a UW Board of
So
Regents
all of this
meeting,
happened
claiming
because we
campus
got these
research
photographs,
on half is
got
torture.
media
Police
coverage off of
arrested
this.
James Cromwell and a PETA protester, new at 10. The two spoke to the 19th Jennifer Hoff after their release from jail. Jennifer?
Eric James Cromwell, better known for roles in The Green Mile and Babe, took part instead today in a staged protest, shouting concern and holding pictures of those cats. We're warning some people might consider graphic. You can't see his face, only hear James Cromwell's voice.
This is torture, and it is criminal.
The actor, famous for playing Farmer Hoggett in Babe, and the Green Mile's warden is instead making news for disrupting Thursday's UW Board of Regents meeting.
Regents are looking the other way.
If people see this and say, oh, that's really horrible, you can do something about this.
Fresh off a couple hours behind Dane County jail bars, Cromwell flew in to team up with PETA and protest the university's animal research. Police arrested the activist and vegan, along with demonstrator Jeremy Beckham.
They get so much grant money for these experiments, and that's what dictates a lot of what happens on this campus, unfortunately.
The duo donned pictures of a cat called Double Trouble. PETA filed suit to obtain them, and researchers say don't tell the whole story.
I believe this study is very valuable, and I believe that the cats are really well cared for. So I think that the benefits outweigh the harms.
Scientists use the cats to study
Look at this,
hearing.
showing the
One day
pictures
create bionic
on
ears
local
for
news.
people born without them.
Everyone
Some
watching the
people are
news
gonna
that evening
say,
is seeing these.
Boy, if we can use 30 cats to understand how hearing works in a better way, to develop bionic ears that can maybe assist thousands of children, then that's worth it. Other people will say, no, it's not worth it.
No matter who you might side with, the shakeup is grabbing the nation's attention.
So there had probably been the two of them in the room. Nobody would have covered this. So you cover it because I'm here, and then that's great.
The San Francisco Chronicle.
Okay, let me stop sharing.
Applause.
So let me share. Sorry about this, everybody.
You're a badass, Jeremy.
Well, thank you for that. But I hope, really, I am trying to tie this back to none of this would have happened, truly, if we didn't have those pictures, if we didn't have this information. That's what led to this whole snowball. In fact, you can see over here on the left, we actually found violations of the Animal Welfare Act in these records and filed a federal complaint, and they got cited for the violations that we uncovered in our records that we got. That citation led to another round of media coverage. Bill Maher actually called this robocall with a pre-recorded Bill Maher message, called every single UW-Madison faculty member, every single one, even in the English department, whatever, and left a voicemail, or if they picked up a recorded message played, condemning the university for these experiments. So it was in the news just constantly, okay? Here's another thing that happened. When we filed that federal complaint I just told you about, the USDA inspected this lab in response to my complaint. And the USDA inspector took pictures of all the cats in this lab. And guess what we did? We FOIA'd for those pictures too. So these pictures were all taken by a USDA inspector. And we shared these, and it created a whole nother round of media because it wasn't just Double Trouble. Double Trouble had long been dead, actually, but these cats were all alive. And so we started a campaign saying, end these experiments and rehome Tiger, rehome NJ, take these devices out of their brains and try to find them homes, okay? So we were able to show these pictures about the cats currently in the lab. And ultimately, after about 1.5 years of campaigning, it worked. They ended these experiments, never started them again. And there were like 6 surviving cats that were actually placed in homes. Believe it or not, they took all that stuff out of their heads and they were able to be rehomed. So, you know, all of this only was made possible through a records request. So that's case study 1. And I apologize, it's 5:45. I hope I don't go over. I know I'm supposed to be over by 6. I want to talk about case study number 2. This is using records laws with a local government agency, Salt Lake City, okay? Excuse me. This picture here, that horse's name was Jerry. Jerry was a horse who was pulling a carriage in downtown Salt Lake in August of 2013. Salt Lake City, for a very long time, had a tradition of horse-drawn carriages in downtown Salt Lake, and in particular, circling the Mormon temple. It was a very popular kind of tourist attraction thing, and a lot of members of the LDS church would go out, especially during the holiday season. The church would put out all these lights, and they would ride a carriage horse around downtown to see the lights. It was kind of a common young Mormon date night thing, to be honest. So, but as hopefully most people on this call knows, there's a lot of serious humane issues with horse-drawn carriages. They live a nose-to-tailpipe existence. They're out there pulling these carriages. Salt Lake City actually has quite an extreme climate. We have really cold winters and we have really hot summers. We have both. And they were out there during both extremes. And there were incidents like this. This picture was actually taken by my girlfriend, Amy, along with several more. We heard word, literally a friend of ours said, hey, gave us a call. There's a carriage horse collapsed on State Street. And we just got in the car immediately and took off. And me and Amy snapped several pictures of this poor horse collapsed on State Street in South Temple. That's right in the heart of downtown Salt Lake City. And it was a 98-degree day that day that Jerry was pulling this horse. It was in August of 2013, sweltering hot, in the middle of a heat wave. And Jerry had to be pulled with ropes to be loaded into a trailer, where he was then taken off to a stable. We followed the trailer all the way to the stable. And then we took this picture here of this animal being lifted up with this piece of machinery, as you could see, and taken into this barn. He was never seen again. We released these photographs to the media, and it created an instant firestorm of press, especially because we're in the middle of a heat wave. There were so many people saying, what in the hell are they doing having carriage horses in downtown Salt Lake on a sweltering August day? Salt Lake Tribune started picking up, national media started picking up, Amy's photos were everywhere. In fact, PETA to this day, I think, still uses a lot of these pictures on just their generic leaflets about horse-drawn carriages. Those pictures you see are Jerry from Salt Lake. The owners of this carriage company made matters even worse when the next morning they released this photograph on the right and said, hey, everybody, look, Jerry's doing okay. Okay, this was the photograph here on the right. Now, you don't have to be an equine expert. Look at that photograph there on the right and look at this horse. Ain't the same horse, okay? This horse here has a pattern called a dapple gray, okay? This horse here does not have that, okay? So we looked at this photograph and I called all the media and I said, is this really the picture they gave y'all? And they said, yes. And I said, that's not Jerry. That's clearly not Jerry. And they all said, well, you're just a PETA person. You don't know what you're talking about. That could be Jerry. And I'm like, well, first of all, just use your own damn eyes. That's not Jerry. But secondly, fine. If you really don't believe me, fine. So what I did was I went out and I talked to, actually, Crystal maybe knows Holly Cheever. Do you know Holly Cheever? Went out and talked to Holly. Holly is an equine veterinarian, a lot of horse expertise. And she wrote an affidavit that said, based on my expert opinion as an equine veterinarian, that ain't the same damn horse. So the same thing I said. We gave it to all
my 8 years of college tells me.
Yeah, exactly.
That's totally necessary to tell
right.
whether a horse is the same as another horse.
Right. It's pretty silly, but someone in the media needed that. And so we went out there and said that. And so then we got the Salt Lake Tribune reporter to go, okay, maybe you have a point. And they went back to the carriage owners and they said, hey, some people are saying that's not Jerry. What do you say to that? And then the carriage company was like, oh, you know what? We sent you the wrong photo. You're right. But Jerry's okay. And then the reporter's like, well, then can I come see Jerry? Can I come see him with my own eyes? And then the carriage company goes, let me get back to you. and then they never called them back. Okay, so then another media firestorm started where everyone was saying they lied to us. They said this was Jerry and it's not Jerry. And so then there were all these calls by even the city council to investigate this. We held these huge demonstrations, you can see here on the steps of the Salt Lake City Council, saying justice for Jerry. We want a ban on horse-drawn carriages. And so what this led to was some city council action here in Salt Lake City. All of this media attention, all these protesters. We had a couple people on the city council who were actually really champions of this issue alongside us, who said, you know, yes, I think we do need to ban horse-drawn carriages. By the way, it was one and only company who operated these carriages. So they had a monopoly since like 1987 here in Salt Lake on these horse-drawn carriages. They were called Carriage for Hire. And they actually had a regulatory arrangement with the city where they had a monopoly. They were allowed to have a monopoly. So local city council members became interested. Public hearings started to be held. And the city council tasked city staff. You can actually see on this little screenshot I put over here where it says Jan Aramaki and Ben Ludicky. Those were two people who worked for the city who were tasked by the city council to do an in-depth report on the horse-drawn carriage industry in Salt Lake City. Well, I was told by a city council member that these people who were tasked with this job are lovely people, but the reality is they have a lot of responsibilities. And so and this is a good lesson for all of us. I was told by the city council member, don't necessarily trust that they're going to do as thorough of a job researching and writing this report as you want them to do. So what you should do, Jeremy, is help them out. You need to help them out. You need to go out there and do research for them and hand them information, spoon feed them information so that we know they don't miss it in their research. And this is important for all of us. If there's a committee, a legislative committee researching an issue, don't assume that they know. They don't lots of times. Lots of times they really are not well informed. And that's part of our job, is to inform them, to give them the information. So what I needed to do to understand the horse-drawn carriage industry a little better, file some records requests. So here you can see on the left and right, I still have these records after all these years. That's one important note or lesson I want to tell everyone. Keep really good records. That's very important. Get a good record keeping system in place, okay? So that I was able to quickly and easily find these records for this presentation today, even though they're almost 10 years old now. So I went into the police station. This is the first thing I did, and I filed this request on the left. This is a grammar request on the left. You don't necessarily have to use this form, but this is the form that the police, Salt Lake City Police, gave me to use. You can see, I wish I could have a mouse, but I guess I can't. About a third of the way down, it says description of records requested. I requested any traffic accident reports, photos, videos, police reports related to any accident involving a horse-drawn carriage from 2008 to present, okay? And present at that time was August 2013. So this was about 5 years. I went back about 5 years. And then I also submitted another request there on the right, which was an emailed records request to the Salt Lake City Police grammar request for a couple incidents that we knew happened. These were things we already knew about. And lo and behold, we got a lot of reports. We got a lot of reports, which also contradicted a lot of the public statements the carriage company was making. They were making a ton of public statements, and they were telling city council members that this incident with Jerry was a freak occurrence. It had never happened before. In 20 years of operating a carriage business, we've never had a horse collapse on the streets. And, you know, it's just a horrible thing, but it's a one-off. It's a very rare thing, okay? False, false. Here are some excerpts. I actually got like a dozen accident reports, separate incidents, but I just excerpted a few here. And I know we are not all going to sit here and read all this text, and I wish I could circle some things. But you can see up here at the top left, this incident from August 2009. A horse-drawn carriage was carrying 7 passengers, including 4 children, when the horse became spooked and took off down the street. The carriage driver tried to stop the horse, but was dragged and became pinned between the curb and the carriage. And now just jump down and look at how this police officer described it. This event occurred on a Saturday night, and the streets were very busy with vehicles and pedestrians, and the carriage ran across the intersection of 300 South and Main, and across the tracks line as well. That's a light rail train line that this horse ran across. This created a very dangerous situation for the public, okay? Then you had this incident on the bottom right. This was an incident from September 2011, only the year before, about a horse that we later, through subsequent records requests, learned was named Cletus. This horse named Cletus collapsed and was laying on the middle of the road and wouldn't get up. Guess what? Cletus died as well, just like Jerry. Just no one knew about it. No one knew about it, including myself, until we did this records request. Because remember I told you about how my friend called me when Jerry collapsed and said, I just drove by State Street and there's a horse there. Well, no one like that happened to drive by that day. No one happened to see this, so no one knew about it until we did this records request. There was also this incident in the top right where a child was actually thrown from the carriage, and then the wheel of the carriage ran over their body in the street, and she had to be transported. This small child had to be transported to the primary care children's hospital for these injuries. So there were multiple incidents that we found, and we gave all of this to the city council, and the city council put all of that. This screenshot actually I showed you earlier right here on the right, it contained all of this. It contained all of these accident reports that we were able to get because of records requests, and all the city council members were aware of this. And again, we kept the issue alive in the media. We kept telling the media about what was going on. And we kept doing protests too. We protested at the hack line. That's where people get on the carriage horses. And we did protests in the city council, constant protests. And eventually, look on the left, September 2014, the carriage company closed their doors. This carriage company basically said, we've had enough. They're out there protesting us. We're constantly in the media. We're looking bad. And I think we just wore them down. We won. They went out of business. But then another company said, well, if they're going out of business, we want to step in and fill the gap. It was a carriage company located north of us in Davis County. And Salt Lake City actually banned it and said, nope, we don't want this anymore. After this company went out, no more. And to this day, we have a ban on horse-drawn carriages in Salt Lake City. And all of this was made possible because of the incident with Jerry and because of all of the research we were able to do about why horse-drawn carriages are so awful from records requests, okay? That was case study number 2. I'll try to be really quick. Number 3, there's a more recent case that I want to talk about. Utah is the very last state in the country that still uses gas chambers to kill dogs and cats in shelters. Most states ban this practice, okay? It's illegal in Texas, it's illegal in California, it's illegal in Alabama, but in Utah, it's still allowed. And there are 2 shelters that recently were still using this very cruel contraption that virtually everyone, including even the AVMA, who we're no friends of, but even the AVMA agrees that euthanasia by injection is cheaper, safer, and more humane than using this method. Year after year, bills have been introduced here in the Utah legislature to try to ban this practice, but they keep failing year after year. And there are 2 shelters here in Utah that still were using this. So what did we do? We started to use grandma. I requested intake records and photographs of animals that were killed via the gas chamber at this shelter, because photographs of these animals were taken when they were first brought in because they want to publicize these animals in case it's someone's lost dog. So they take a picture of this dog. So they're holding on to these pictures. Guess what? That's a record. You can request that, okay? And there's a bias that people have that probably every animal advocate's aware of. And I forget the exact name for it, but it's basically the individual animal bias. We can hear that 1 million turkeys are killed or depopulated on a turkey farm through ventilation shutdown, and we're kind of numb to that. But if we talk about Rosie the turkey and what this one turkey went through, or what that one cat Double Trouble went through, we're able to empathize with that, and it makes the issue more real. So we wanted to do that for the dogs and cats who were being killed in this gas chamber. Tragically, all these pictures I'm showing you are of animals who were killed in the gas chamber at North Utah Valley Animal Shelter. We got information of these animals, where they came from, which street they were found on in Utah by animal control officers, and we were able to post posters in these neighborhoods. Did you lose your cat? Sorry to tell you, this cat was killed in a cruel gas chamber. If you're upset by this, contact your local elected official, okay? We were able to show these pictures to people. We made a social media post here. This was a Facebook post. People could actually click each one of these pictures and read all of the details, what the animal's name was if they knew it, where they were found, you know, little details like loves to catch a tennis ball. It made people relate to these individual animals. And this post went pretty viral. You can see down there, it had over 1,000 shares. Okay, and the local media started covering it. We did a protest. I was going to show you this video, but we're getting low on time, so I won't. But here was the media covered a protest that we did, where actually a former employee of the shelter came out and testified against the gas chambers. Okay, it was a pretty amazing thing.
Animal rights
I'll show you
activists
just
in
20
Utah
seconds.
County are rallying for change.
They're upset with the way a shelter is euthanizing animals that can't be adopted. Fox 13's John Franke is in Utah County tonight to show us how they took their fight right to the Orem City Council. John.
Well, hey guys, this is the facility that those activists say needs to change, the North Utah Valley Animal Shelter. It serves several communities in this county, and what has those activists upset is its use of carbon monoxide to euthanize animals.
Shelters that are still doing this are just woefully outdated.
The intense heat was no match for these activists outside Orem City Hall, fighting for their cause.
This shelter that services Orem is one of only 4 in the entire country that is still killing dogs and cats in a carbon monoxide gas chamber.
Jeremy Beckham is the director.
All right, you guys get the idea. Anyway, I'm going to cut to the chase. We ended up winning this too. The shelter said they're no longer going to use the gas chamber to kill animals. Now, they took way too damn long to make the transition. This article posted in August 2021, and they didn't switch to injection until literally only a couple months ago. But it happened, okay? We finally were able to move the needle, and both the shelters in Utah, the other one is called South Utah Valley Animal Shelter, have now switched to injection. And this was all because of this public outrage and this media attention that we were able to build. And that was all made possible because of the records requests. It really was. It was because we went viral talking about those individual animals. And the only way we could talk about those individual animals was through records requests. Here's just really quick some other revelations that I've been a part of using open records. COVID is a disease that actually mink can contract, and mink farms in the United States were the source of huge COVID outbreaks. Mink were giving COVID to farmers, and farmers were giving COVID to mink. It was bi-directional transmission. And what was crazy was that these mink farms were actually getting compensated by the government when COVID would hit their farm and kill all their mink. So this created a lot of crazy public health concerns. And I was able to learn a lot about the fact that the mink industry was covering up a lot of these outbreaks. The CDC was even covering up some of these outbreaks. They lied about the fact that mink actually gave COVID to a farmer in Michigan. It went the other way, which is of particular concern, right? That's why, for example, these avian influenza outbreaks that are happening, while concerning, are not shit your pants concerning yet, because transmission from birds to humans have been very, very rare. I think there was one case in Colorado. But it turns out with mink farms, it was happening all the time. And we learned that through open records requests. We learned what the government didn't want people to know. And I worked with reporters at National Geographic and New York Times Magazine to talk about this. I got videos of primate experiments occurring at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. These were trying to model child abuse. And they were these horrible psychological experiments. Jane Goodall condemned them. And eventually the NIH stopped conducting these experiments after these videos went viral. I actually, to this day, still see PETA tweet out little clips and photographs from these videos that I was able to obtain. Also, civil rights violations. I'm going to jump to bullet point 4. Police, they're wearing these body cameras now. Guess what? You can request that footage, okay? So if they had got on their body cam them violating your constitutional rights, for example, telling you you can't protest here, you can't hand out leaflets here, as just happened in Beaver County, Utah, you do a grammar request, get that footage, based on that footage, go to federal court and say, this cop violated my civil rights, okay? And I've been involved in doing that many times, okay? Some final tips. This is my last slide. Then we'll have questions. I apologize I talk so long. When you're submitting your records request, be as precise as you can when you describe the records you want to seek. Don't give them wiggle room to claim, well, you didn't really request what you meant to request. Try to be as specific as you can, okay? Keep a paper trail of every single communication that you have with a government entity. You never know when your request may end up in court, and if you do end up in court, you want to have proper documentation of everything. Save every email you have with them. If you have a phone conversation with them, as soon as you hang up, create what's called a record of call form, which is just you typing up a little document. I spoke with Jane Doe at the FDA, and she said that she'd have records for me by the end of the month, and it was about 800 pages. And I agreed that it'd be fine to redact the names of patients involved in the clinical study. Whatever it is, whatever you said in that call, put it in a record. That can actually be introduced as evidence in court later as well. So just keep really good records of everything. Keep track of deadlines, okay? When you submit a records request, in Utah, for example, the government agency has 10 business days to respond. Put on your calendar a little reminder 10 business days from now that says, I should hear today. And if you don't hear from today by that day, that allows you to follow up. and say, hey, Mr. Government employee, you were supposed to respond to me yesterday and you didn't. What's going on? What's going on with my records request? If you're not keeping track of your deadlines, they're not either, okay? Another tip, loop in a reporter or a journalist from an early stage as you can, okay? Open records are a good vehicle for press attention, and often reporters really care about open records laws too because they use them all the time. So if a government agency is violating the open records law, they have a self-interest even in reporting on that and trying to hold them accountable for that. Lastly, don't be afraid to reach out for help from me or someone else who's an open records veteran. I've been involved in litigation under open records laws in Oregon, California, Utah, Texas, Missouri, New York, Georgia, Wisconsin, probably more that I'm not even remembering right now. And so I've got a lot of experience over the years, and I'm happy to try to help you. There are other people out there that have done this for a long time. There's people on Twitter you should follow, like Jason Leopold, who's done a ton of FOIA requests for BuzzFeed. And so yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to me. There's my email, and it's just after 6. I apologize. I'll open up for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And you you filled the whole hour, so that's amazing. As far as questions, did we address the BLM question? Or
so for the BLM, I would just say email me about that because it sounds very interesting. And I just want to say it wouldn't surprise me at all if the BLM is trying to evade FOIA, and you maybe need to do something to hold them accountable. Like, don't take their word for it. I don't know if that makes sense, but so just shoot me an email, and I'll take a look at the request and give you my 2 cents.
Cool. And another question from Emek is, how fast are they supposed to respond to a request? It sounds like it varies depending.
Yeah, so under FOIA, the federal law, federal agency is supposed to respond to your request within 20 days. However, their response might just be a response giving themselves more time. But you still are supposed to know that within 20 days. And they're supposed to then say why they need more time. And usually they'll say something like, your request is very complex or voluminous. Therefore, we need additional time to process it. If you think there's an unreasonable delay, like you requested something that should only be 20 or 30 pages, they should be able to find that easily and get it to you right away, and they're taking months and months or even years, it may be time to go to court. You can try to pester them a little bit and say, hey, what's going on? Why is this taking so long? Follow up with them over and over, be a bit of an annoying person. And if they're still delaying, you may just have to go to court. You can sue over unreasonable delay as well.
And Lisa has a question. Or your hand is raised, Lisa. Do you want to unmute and ask?
Yes, thank you. I'm driving, so I can't type in. I'm calling from Milwaukee, and I am working on a lot of research on one of the big egg laying farms in Wisconsin. And I'm having trouble getting anyone to answer, the methods they use to depopulate, to kill up to 3 million birds. So we're getting a lot of runaround. So I don't know if you, I'm not sure the best agency to request this information from.
I might have some info on that, but I don't know, Jeremy, your thoughts first before I answer.
Sure. And yeah, I'm sure Crystal has a lot of insights here because she's worked on this issue a lot.
Yeah.
But the first thing I want to mention is because that egg laying facility is a private facility,
right?
You're not able to get their records. But with these outbreaks of avian flu, usually government agencies end up getting involved, and they generate records, and you're able to get those. So you should be able to get some records from, I believe in Wisconsin, it's called something like the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Protection or something like that.
Yes.
The State Department of Agriculture there. They may have some records, as well as USDA APHIS. It might have some records. And it probably just comes down to exactly what language you're using in your records request. And Crystal can probably take it from there, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I know an attorney who is working on this, and another animal rights group who I probably shouldn't mention on this call, but if you want to email me, I'll put my email in the chat. And
I would love that.
I know they, and I also know a journalist who's working on this as well. And
I do too.
They probably
I'm
have
working with her. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But,
Then
I don't know if the attorneys, go ahead.
We'll talk privately about this.
That sounds good.
I think,
but it's one of those situations where, you know, there are a lot of agencies involved in this one. So I guess you end up having to FOIA, you know, all of them really.
Yep.
Our DNR, DATCAP, and USDA. I guess that's the way to go.
Yep.
Does that sound
exactly
right? Okay, great. Thank you.
I would say USDA, but there might be something else that some other people know that I can connect you with, who have some other ideas. I know this one group who every month gets all of that data, and they might have that already. But I'm surprised they probably would have shared it with the person you're talking to. But
they may have by now. So I'll find that out. And I have one other quick question. I was at UW-Madison Primate Center because twice a year they have an open house. So a couple of us went to, you know, visit. And
you probably saw some marmosets.
Sorry?
Did you see some marmosets?
Yeah, we sure did.
Yeah,
as you walk
I've been
in.
there.
Yeah. So that's really the only thing they have open. But we were planning to, you know, have some information outside and, you know, kind of like do a protest, but then no one was there. So we just went in and spent an hour talking to the PR person. And well, what I'm really interested in relates to this call is they were saying that, you know, they haven't released a primate since the 1990s to any sanctuary. And they were saying they can't because of NIH's, you know, these are NIH animals, and NIH needs a certified sanctuary, and none of it made sense. And I talked to a local sanctuary, and that didn't make sense to her either. So I want to find out more about NIH and primate release. I'm not sure how to do that.
I know a little bit about this, Lisa. Let me ask you this: was the sanctuary you reached out to Primates Inc. and Amy Kerwin?
Yes.
Okay. She knows a lot about it too.
She does, and I talked to her, but she didn't want to, she doesn't want to be known as asking those kind of questions, you know, through UW. Yeah. So I was trying to help. So yeah, maybe we could talk to.
Yeah, shoot me an email. So the NIH has a somewhat of a retirement program for chimps, specifically chimpanzees, but not other primates. That being said, I'm not aware of any specific NIH policy which would prohibit UW from sending them to sanctuaries afterwards. So
yeah, that's what I want to figure out.
Yeah, shoot me an email. I'm interested in helping with that too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm sorry we have so many secret non-answers for people, but
can I see a couple questions in the chat that I can quickly answer, I think.
Go for it. I was looking through the chat. Yeah.
Karen Rubio says, do you sometimes get inundated with too many records? And the answer is absolutely. That can be. And also sometimes you get a lot of records that you have a hard time interpreting. That happens a lot. Like in the animal research community, for example, first of all, there's just a lot of medical technical jargon that sometimes I might reach out to Crystal for and be like, hey, what the hell is this acronym? Or what is this drug? What do they use this drug for? And so, you know, don't be afraid to reach out, you know, to your networks of experts. Try to build those connections, I think. And, you know, I was involved with a campaign at Beagle Freedom Project called the Identity Campaign, where people would request records related to an individual animal that they virtually adopted, an animal still in a lab, and they would get their daily care logs, vet records. And this program of Beagle Freedom Projects was actually wildly successful. And there were like hundreds and hundreds of people all around the country all filing these records requests. And then they'd get like 200 pages of records and email them to me. And I got like unbelievably overwhelmed. I just couldn't review it all. And so it's something that can happen. You know, you just have to try to do your best, and you get, the more you review records, the better you get at just kind of, you get some sense for figuring out what's important and what's not in records, I think. Asking for emails surrounding a record can sometimes be helpful, because sometimes the people who made the report will send an email, hey, Jim, attached is my inspection report. Looks like UW-Madison has got some serious issues with their infection treatment program. Oh, that's what this record's about. You know, like someone talking about the record can sometimes help guide you to what you should be looking at. But, you know, sometimes there's no shortcut. And I mean, I just barely left a position with Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And while I was there, I poured over hundreds and hundreds of pages from UC Davis. They had a contract for a while from Elon Musk's company Neuralink to conduct these highly invasive and deadly brain experiments on monkeys. They're really hideous experiments. I want everyone to know this man is funding awful, awful shit. And it took me a long time. I just had to just go through them page by page to try to understand what this line of research was, what a neural interface was, what kinds of surgeries they were doing. And I mean, it just took me literally weeks and weeks, and trying to also catch up to speed with the field of research of this type of neuroscience. And sometimes there's just no shortcut for that. So, but you know, the flip side of that is the horse carriage thing I talked about. Anyone can understand a police report of a traffic accident, right? You're not necessarily always going to be looking to something that technical and in-depth. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that Elon Musk story was amazing and like definitely got so much media attention. I don't, did you have anything to do with the press on that, or was that all PCRM?
Yeah, I mean, that was my campaign while I was there.
Oh, that was your whole thing.
The complaints we filed with the USDA and the press surrounding that was all something I spearheaded.
That was amazing. Yeah, I need tips on getting press around ventilation shutdown and stuff, so we'll talk. Okay. But Tonya asked, Jeremy, how did you learn about this experiment on cats to start with, like to know to do FOIAs about it? Like, was it whistleblower in the lab?
It wasn't a whistleblower. It was actually the researchers themselves published papers in scientific journals with written descriptions of what they did. So we just looked at, you know, it's like the Journal of Neuroscience, and we knew the authors' names, and that was what first put it on our radar. Karen, I totally agree with you. You should protest Elon Musk. He's got a facility in Fremont, California, with monkeys in it, and they don't want it to be known where it is, and y'all should show up there one day. I can give you some information.
Did I miss questions? I felt like there was some question from Julie about the troubled teen industry or something that I might have skipped over.
I was just saying how just like people I know in the troubled teen industry activism have requested, you know, all these records, and they're getting crazy delays even after they've paid for them. They're just getting like forever delays. I just said that when Jeremy was talking about delays, but I had a question. Just like I remember when we got a bunch of information and found out that like Crystal was being talked about by I don't even remember who, but they redacted so much of the documents that they gave to us. Like, I mean, should we ever be suspicious of that? Like, are they ever just redacting it because they don't want us to know like what they're talking about? Like, how do we, it's like there's no way to figure out whether they're just redacting stuff for their own benefit or not, because we can't see what it is.
Yeah. Excuse me. I mean, the short answer is yes, you should be suspicious. You know, and redactions under the law are treated like any other denial. So if you think they improperly redacted something, which means that that they redacted something that doesn't fall under one of the exemptions, you can appeal that in court as well. And, you know, sometimes it can be hard to know what they redacted, especially if they redact like a whole page. They are, your fulfillment though did come with a cover letter that says we withheld information or pages, and they should give you a basic explanation as to why. Now, their explanation may be a bunch of junk, but it should at least allow you to scrutinize it and, you know, maybe talk to an attorney. Was this a federal FOIA? I think it was with Crystal, right?
This was a FOIA of the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service. And yeah, we got the original FOIA where they're talking about me, but then we did another FOIA, and stuff that was previously open was now redacted. And unfortunately, the legal team did not think it was worthwhile to pursue an appeal. I have since done a new FOIA, and I will try to, you know, push it a little bit more than they did with some other people. But yeah.
I mean, and just if you think it's really worthwhile, pursue your appeal rights.
Yeah.
You know, everyone just has to make a bit of a cost benefit judgment there, though. Like, even if it's an improper redaction, you're like, well, is it really worth the fight? That's just a hard reality, like, because this stuff can take literally years. I mean, I told you that Wisconsin thing took 3 years. So, you know, you just have to kind of make those judgments kind of on a case-by-case basis.
And what was interesting is we did do a FOIA of the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service, which is really easy to do. And we should, I don't know if there's like we could maybe make some sort of website or like a list, or maybe this already exists, of common places to FOIA and with like links or examples of emails to send, because it's literally just an email, and we got language from a lawyer, and I use that as a template for anything that I want to FOIA from that organization, because it's a great template to use. And I might just like publish that on my website or something. Would that be a problem when people might not appreciate templates like that a bit readily available?
I've given people templates many times, and in fact, there's already some templates out there. There's I'll show you one that's pretty good. In my opinion, it's not perfect. If I were writing this template, I would write it a little different, but it's still decent. Let me send the link. It's by the Student Press Law Center, and I'm going to put a link in the chat right now.
Okay.
How do I take off? Right now it says I'm sending a direct message, and I don't want to in the chat.
You can press the to field. It says you can send to everyone instead of an individual person.
It's weird. It won't let me. I don't see everyone. I just see other name. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. There it is. I got it. Sorry. So there's like an example template, and it's pretty good. And like I said, shoot me an email too. You know, I'm happy to help. I've helped many people with records requests.
Cool. Yeah, and one thing I did learn from that like heavily redacted document that we got is we FOIA'd several people's names. But the problem is we got this big stack of documents that was all black, and it's like, well, how much of it this is this person, how much of that is that person? So we should have just like done one FOIA for each name, so at least we'd see how big of our stack is of things they're talking about that was all redacted.
Here's another thing too, actually, Crystal. There's one of the FOIA exemptions is related to personally private information, and that implicates, I think it's just called the Federal Privacy Act. But if the individual concerns you, you can waive that. So what you should ideally do is have each activist submit it for themselves, and put a few sentences in there that say, any information concerning me, I waive my right to have you withhold that information under the Privacy Act.
Okay. What is it?
Like, if you request information about me, I have some privacy rights that the government is obligated to redact information about me to you. But if you're requesting information about yourself, it's not the same. You know, you can tell the government agency, don't redact stuff that's about me because I'm requesting it.
So would you say I waive my right to withhold my information from, I guess that's it, right?
Send me an email and I'll get you the exact verbiage to use. You use the same FOIA verbiage when you're requesting your own FBI file, because I can't really request your FBI file. I mean, I can, but I'm going to get something even more redacted than when I request my own.
Yeah, I definitely have to request my FBI file, see what that says. But okay, anyway, Julian asked, any concern that FBI FOIA may trigger interests that didn't exist prior, e.g. any anecdotal info about someone experiencing noticeably more scrutiny immediately following FOIA?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern. Like, you know, if you weren't on a list before, you might be on one now.
Wow.
I just figured, you know, I'm already being watched to some degree, so I went ahead and requested my own. But if I think that's definitely a valid concern. Like, if you weren't someone on their radar at all, they might be like, why the hell is this person think he should be on our radar or she should be on our radar, right? Like, I think that's valid. And a link in the chat to something that a group called Rise for Animals has called Arlo. That's pretty interesting. basically they have someone on staff just constantly doing FOIA and open records requests and then just dumping them on this database. And it's pretty interesting. It's like, I don't think many people know about it, but there's a lot of really interesting records on here. So you can go on there and type in, is it Irvine? That's where you're going, UC Irvine?
No, I go to UIC, University, Illinois, Chicago.
Actually, you have an enormous dog lab there. I've done records requests.
Oh God, no.
It's actually one of the biggest in the country.
Oh my
Wow,
God.
that's terrible.
It is terrible. And they're doing, it's actually, I could tell you a lot about that lab. I have a lot of records from there. And I know where the lab is too. It's another one they're trying to keep the location secret. And it's kind of crazy. If you look it up on Google Maps, like the street view, Google has blurred out the building, which I hadn't seen before. The actual the building where the lab is like a blur now. And so it's like the university must have put in some request with Google to not show their building on Street View.
Wow.
And it's near downtown Chicago, actually. I mean, you could go protest it and it'd be a great protest location.
Yeah.
That, like, nobody knows about that. Nobody's
we should
talks about the dogs at UIC. That's like a hidden gem or something.
Yeah.
Is this a public university too?
Yep.
Yeah, public research university.
Okay. Yeah, let's elevate that story. Let's make it the next Envigo Ridgeland thing.
Yeah. This is what it's called here. The Biologic Resources Laboratory, if I recall correct. I have some records, after this call, send me an email and I can dig through my records. But this place has several hundred dogs. We're correct about Colorado State as well. I've got records from there in the past too.
Yeah. Thank you.
I know some students there. I got to ask what they're currently doing and what they're using the beagles for. I know they ended terminal surgeries there at Colorado State, so that's good. But they might still be using them for just practicing anesthesia without cutting them open or something like that. Animal handling. But yeah, cool. Well, thank you guys. This was super interesting, and thank you all for coming. And I will throw this up on our YouTube channel afterwards, unless there's anything that we shouldn't say to the public in this thing. I don't think there was. Did we incriminate ourselves in any way? I don't think so. So anyway, bye y'all. See y'all next time.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Bye, see ya.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy and Crystal.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Jeremy, Crystal.